Welcome to Good Revenue. We're here today with a very accomplished and exciting guest, Carrie Holtz. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You have been so generous to give us some of your time, and you've had such a thrilling career. I'm really excited for our listeners to get to hear a little bit about you. And I didn't want to steal your thunder, so I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and maybe the big question is, how did you get to where you are today?
Oh, well, I'll start with that big question. I think um, the common theme through everything has been just a kind of commitment to my personal values, which has been around excellence and a growth mindset and just having fun and building on relationships. So, who I am, in a nutshell, I'm a business professional. Grew up in the Midwest, so I have Midwest values, but I've been in the New York City area for over 30 years, and spent the past 20 some years as an HR executive and leader in that space, mostly in professional service firms, so high performing consulting firms. And before that was a consultant for 10 years. That's where I started my career working with companies in distress, turnarounds and restructurings.
Which is one of the things I was so struck by when we first met, because I think that there is so much opportunity that comes out of businesses at a time that is understandably really difficult for employees, for stakeholders, for anyone who's kind of helped to build that enterprise. And I think that, at least my sense, kind of looking at it from my perspective, is that there's an untapped wealth of insights, I think, in that space that a lot of us don't think about. And I'm curious. I mean, what was that journey like? You because you've had such breadth. Was it what you anticipated? Were there some things that were surprising?
Well, hindsight's 2020, but I mean, simply put, it's not a straight line. There's lots of zigs and zags, some which are obvious. Um, I think most importantly, though, it's taking those pauses and really reflecting at different points around, is this fulfilling? Am I exponentially growing? Does this work feel good and meaningful to me? Is this what I need at this point in my life, given other competing demands? I got married, I had children. Um, and is this coming back to those values? Is this really filling my heart? And it's hard, especially when we're on, what often feels like that hamster wheel, running and running and running, but we have to drive our own careers. We have to take these pauses and reflect. And even even in that moment of what we're doing, is this the right decision? Is this where my team and I should be investing our attention? Is this where we're going to get the greatest return of this investment right now? So it was hard. There's moments where it's really difficult. I felt stuck. I faced fear. Um, Easy to look back on, hard when you're in that moment.
I think that's really well said. I fully agree with that. What do you think was particularly rewarding, or what are you most proud of in your career so far?
I don't think about that as often as I should. A couple things. One is just more life than career per se, but it just that I took that bold step and left Michigan, which is where I grew up, and went to school. I knew no one. Um, did that again when I moved to the New York area. One thing I'm really proud of, I was recognized by the leader of the restructuring practice. I was going to leave and go back to business school, and he essentially said, "Look, stay. We want to invest in you. We'll pay for your education." So that was really fantastic. Um, and then some of it is making those hard decisions, facing my fear, um, overcoming that, making those shifts. I moved from being a consultant into HR. I knew nothing about HR other than from a couple classes I took when I was at Columbia getting my MBA. But that's where learning and growth is so exponential. So I think I'm proud of just taking those big, bold steps.
I can see that. And I can see how that would translate. All of that experience has obviously enabled you to help companies think through some of their bigger challenges around transformation and turnarounds and restructuring. What is your perspective on this kind of work as you look at it today? I mean, you now work with senior executives, and so they're really the operators. But given that you've been an operator and are now in this kind of advisory and coaching role, what's your perspective on that work now?
Let me just get clarity specifically on like turnarounds and restructurings.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was curious about that. I mean, feel free to take that in a broader direction, but maybe some more context too is just, we've gone through such a almost a 15-year period of insane growth that felt like it would never end, and then the last couple years coming out of COVID have been, I think, more uncertain for just about everyone, even people who are very successful. And so I do think there are lots of questions around maybe it's not as formal as a turnaround or restructuring, but certainly like, is this the right business model? Have we set our organizations up for success? Like those are topics I think that are top of mind. So that's why that's particularly interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Has a few thoughts. I mean, one is just the importance of, it's very lonely at the top. So, one thing I see common thread with all of my executives is they need that space to really think strategically and to reflect and evaluate, is this the best management team? Are we making the right decisions? Are there ways that this transformation or the way we're operating our business, are there divisions that we may be more productive, effective as a company if we let go of this, sell this off? Are we making the right long-term decisions in line? Are people in line with those long-term decisions? And one thing I often see and saw in my HR roles is our compensation, the way we are recognizing and rewarding people in line with our longer term decisions. So whether it's a transformation or a restructuring, often or turnaround, often or selling off a division of the business, whatever may be happening, I think we need, everyone needs to kind of embrace, as opposed to fear, embrace these opportunities as ways to just evolve and grow and have the best outcome long term. And it's just like each of us in our careers, it's not a straight line. There's lots of zigs and zags, and we need to constantly pause and look at that fork in the road or evaluate those different forks and directions and think through what makes the most sense for us at this point, given the climate, given interest rates, given what we're facing, at least those knowns.
So that's interesting. When maybe building off of that, what do you think people get wrong about turnarounds and transformation? Because I think you're alluding to that a little bit in the maybe the potential for the opportunity, which of course is really hard when you're in it. I mean, I have been there. We've all been there. Like it's easy to say to someone else, I think, but hard when you're living it.
Yeah, there's a lot of misperception, I think, particularly around bankruptcy, Chapter 11. It really allows a company to get a fresh start, or a division, right? To get a fresh start by both scaling back the business so that they can really maximize profits. They can ensure there's a strong recovery to the creditors. And it allows, there's a whole domino effect too with the restructuring. So for example, if many people think restructuring Chapter 11 means we're liquidating the business, it's not that at all. It just allows you to pause at that moment in time, figure out how to settle those debts. If you were to liquidate, all these employees would lose their jobs. All these suppliers, vendors to the company would potentially have a domino effect and lose that business. So it allows a fresh start. It allows like a healthy reset to set that business up for future success.
What do you think senior leaders should be thinking about if they're evaluating, again, whether it's a formal restructuring or if there's, something else that's pretty transformational to the business? What should they consider?
Yeah. One of my favorite questions, regardless, is what's going well and what would be even better? And I think they need to often, take time and think about that and discuss it with their executive team and really brainstorm around what can we do that would be even better for our employees, better for, our customers, and how do we get there so that you can ultimately like maximize the return on your investment. Like that one commodity for all of us is our time and how we're spending it. And I think we work in a very dynamic world. Things are changing all the time. So really pausing and taking that moment to explore where we are on this journey of transformation and how do we get to that next new peak. What makes the most sense given where we are, and talking to one another so that if something happens in the technology side which has an impact on the overall business, everyone's aware of that and can kind of adjust.
Yeah, I think that situational awareness gets lost sometimes because again, you're in it, you're in the fire. I think you can lose that perspective easily. And it also ties into a topic that comes up a lot for me and has been one of the core themes of this podcast, which is what is that right balance between short and long term, right? It's a perennial challenge for anyone in business. And I have some thoughts on this, but again, your perspective is particularly interesting. Like where do you think leaders, like how should leaders approach this if they're trying to find a balance there or trying to get some perspective on how to approach things?
How I like to think of it, my overall kind of approach is less is more. So long term, what are 2 or 3, no more, but 2 or 3 big goals that we want to achieve as a company? And then, okay, and alignment around that. Everyone agrees. Okay, well, short term, like what does that look like? Our milestones, what are our milestones in 9 months? What are our milestones in 6 months? What are our milestones in 3 months? You could break that down, whatever makes sense for your business, but so that there are short term, even weekly, what do we need to achieve weekly so that there are short term milestones, benchmarks that help to get towards that long term goal. And then all the related, rules or understandings, what's profit, what revenue sales are going to actually be profitable for us versus, are we going to invest in this so we can, because we're a loss leader right now, but, how does that fit into those longer term goals? And being really conscious and aware and alignment as a team with your respective teams aligned on that. What are your thoughts?
I fully agree. I think alignment I'm trying not to laugh because I feel like it's a word I probably am overusing these days. But I do think that if you're to pick one thing that is off in a team or an organization that isn't maybe where they want to be, it's alignment. It's a lack of alignment. That's what I find. People, and the other thing I find interesting, I'd be curious to know if this happens in your work and practice. I think oftentimes the CEO or the very senior team think that everyone is in alignment. And then when you go one click down or you ask executives individually, what is that long-term goal? And to your point, what are a couple of short-term things that we're doing to get there? All the answers are different. This comes up constantly in positioning work and like long-term strategy work that we do. So I don't, and actually that relates to, do you think that, that leaders have a good sense of that? Like, do they, are they able to strike that balance, or like, what do they get right or wrong? Like, because again, you're in a position where I think you can see patterns. So are any of those maybe helpful to our audience?
What I witness both as a professional and now as an executive coach for the past few years, I think it's cloudy. And what I mean by that is I think that a lot of leaders, they're setting too many goals. And then there's just not enough conversation around it. They might have a formal process in place, like let's set our goals and we'll check in at 6 months. But it should be less about kind of a formal professional goal planning process and more around the dialogue, could be part of standing one-on-one weekly agendas with your, team around how are things going, getting really crystal clear around what we want to accomplish and checking in frequently, and leaders coaching their direct reports to help them independently drive towards those goals and think through their challenges. So I'm seeing in some places it's done reasonably well. It takes focus, it takes attention, it takes a real commitment to getting really crystal clear around what those goals are and what great looks like, and that constant mindset and attention to what would be even better. So for that continuous improvement. And then sharing, look, it kind of comes back a little bit to what I was saying, but like nothing's a straight line. There's lots of zigzags. There's so many dynamics in the world we're living in. Things change all the time. And so being able to be agile and shift and really think through strategically, what does this mean for our business? And then having those conversations.
What I hear you saying in there too is that there is a journey in getting to wherever you're trying to go. And it feels additional to me beyond setting the destination, the goal, and the executional work. And it feels like there's some middle there that I think we discount.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that journey is just as important, if not as important, as that goal. And so, if you think about it, I mean, I love to hike. So you think about it as like just hiking. And for me, at least when I'm out on a trail, being out in the fresh air allows me to think and consider, okay, you come to, which way do I want to go? And you have to enjoy that journey too. And you have to continue to think, is this the right way? And is this where I should step, as a metaphor? Or do I walk through this puddle? Do I step around it? There's going to be lots. It's just that. And whatever your sport or interest, painting may be, right? It's all part of that journey towards that finished product. And we have to really be aware and cognizant and reflective as we're creating that masterpiece, as we're achieving that goal.
You've worked with a lot of different types of teams. So another area of pattern recognition I'm curious about is around high performance companies, high performance teams. What do you think those types of organizations do differently, and what can we learn from them?
Yeah, so thank you for that. I mean, two of the organizations that I spent significant time with, majority of my careers, was PricewaterhouseCoopers and Alix Partners, both who are global consulting firms, and highly selective in the talent that they hire and develop, and special cultures. So yeah, that's one of them. I mean, one thing that high performance, and then a bunch of my clients, and I learned a lot from them. So exceptional culture is an important one, and what that looks like. There's great communications. They're listening. Leaders are really listening to their folks, to their people, to their direct reports, as well as to their juniors, and those employees feel heard. They feel understood, and they feel comfortable sharing knowledge. There's also a culture of inclusion and belonging. They feel that regardless of their differences, they're respected, and those differences are embraced. And how that shows up is inviting them to the conversations, respecting, embracing different points of view, coming back to that initial point of feeling heard and understood, and being comfortable. And even if the outcome is different, they had a part in that process, and they are different from what they thought. And, hopefully they're brought along on that journey. And the other piece, there's so much more to all of this, but the other piece of culture that I think is really critical is that there's really clear values. The company or organization has clear values, a clear mission, there's a clear vision. It may change, but that's articulated. So that drives connection. It drives alignment, like we talked about, and it really results in efficiencies to our outcomes. Another thing that I think high performing companies do well. Well, before I move on, let me just pause and
Oh, it
ask
really
you.
resonates with me. I think you're right. I think I feel like inclusiveness has become a little bit of a buzzword. I really believe in it. And I do think that I think people are appreciative on every level when they really believe that they belong in an organization. And one of the words I heard you say that really resonates with me is respect, which isn't a word I think we talk enough about. But I do think again that people want to feel valued, not that you say you have values, but at the end of the day, is that you see me as a human and a professional, hopefully a competent one, and I think everyone wants that. So I think
Yeah.
that really resonates.
Yeah. I mean, a good part of my career, particularly when I was a consultant, was you couldn't voice a different point of view, or you were shamed or looked upon. And we had today, not all companies do this or do it well, but the
Yeah.
good companies, those that are really have, I think, that are high performing and exceptional cultures, embrace those different points of view.
Do you think that these apply to organizations at any size or scale?
I mean, I'd like to see it apply. I can't think of a situation where it wouldn't, but this is just my perception because I do some work, pro bono work and of service work with nonprofits, and um, again, this is more might be more, but some of them are not as far along on this journey as compared to when you look at some firms that are leaders in high performing high cultures. Another thing I think that really high performing companies do, and again, this is perhaps not in any particular order, perhaps they're all very equally balanced, but they invest in their people. And they share knowledge and they make that a priority, both company wide and individually. So um, that can look a lot of different ways. It actually provides those companies that are best at it offer a lot of variety based on what works best for the individual. But I think it's really important. Yes, you learn a lot on the job. I mean, that's the majority of learning happens in your role if you're being stretched, appropriately stretched. And again, I'm not thinking about companies where you're just running on a assembly line. I'm thinking about more consulting firms and high performing organizations, but they're really supportive of networking. They're providing very informative data and metrics to help manage results, so you know what's working well and what's not. And they're investing in all levels of talent, not just their top talent. And that kind of goes hand in hand along with that whole spirit of continuous improvement. So these high performing companies are, it's okay to make a mistake as long as we learn from it. It comes back to that, what went well, what would have been even better. No perfection does not exist. So opportunity to really embrace failures, to learn, to improve, to celebrate what went well, recognize people's accomplishments, and think about ways that things could be even better, which includes how can we further drill down into our data and provide analytics so we have a real good pulse around what's going well. And then the last thing and then I'm going to turn it to you to get your thoughts because I feel like I'm talking too much. But the last piece of this is they really treat all of their employees like owners of the business. People feel like even if they don't technically have equity, they feel like they're an owner. They're incentivized to think, and ideally those, even if it's like a phantom stock plan, but if they can have some, or an ESOP, an equity stock ownership plan where they can have some ownership in the business, really makes a big difference. People will bring their best. It'll incentivize to really think like an owner and get a high return, long-term success.
I think this is an incredible list. I mean, I think these are really thoughtful components that any executive should really include. And it relates to the other question that I think goes hand in hand with this, which is, CEOs, I think, are under a unique level of pressure right now, again, because I think the world is changing, and as we're recording this, it's gotten particularly intense again for many people around the world. What kind of advice would you give CEOs? Like, what is the top advice? And maybe I'll also just add a little context of, you coach CEOs and you coach top executives, and you're helping people improve their performance and to really build these high performing organizations and teams and themselves. So if that kind of relates into the work you do, feel free to tell us about that too. But yeah, curious to know what your advice would be.
Yeah, from my perspective, one of the most important things, I think every CEO, frankly, every executive, it's very lonely at the top. I think they all need an executive coach to help them, to challenge them, help point out when they're making assumptions, be a thought partner, help them, get crystal clear about their goals and how things are shifting and what does that mean. Constantly kind of keep a pulse on what's going on in their business. Certainly they need to be really crystal clear around their top priorities. And as that changes, that's fine. But what's truly going to be essential long-term for our business and for profitable growth, and to meet some of the specific goals that may be in place with their investors, with their boards. One thing I see often that I don't think enough CEOs and perhaps executives are thinking about is this the best team that I can have in place? They really need an exceptional team of leaders that, can help raise the bar and develop the team underneath them, strong succession plan, so that, and thought partners to the CEO, so that, the operational functions are just exceptional, top notch, and they're driving kind of and developing a team that can accelerate the impact that they want to see. And I think this is true, just for perspective. I mean, a lot of this is very broad. Each individual has their own challenges, and development opportunities to work through. But whether someone's a new CEO or new to the executive ranks, or they've been in that role for 25 years, they're still growing. They're still developing. And the ways to do that, and the ways to think about just responding to their climate that they're operating in, is important. No one's on auto drive.
So, just building on that discussion about CEOs, I think executive coaching is incredibly helpful. I have been very fortunate in my career to have worked with some, just really fantastic resources, both of whom had been executives themselves previously, and it was a real benefit to me. And you today are a coach to some, very senior executives. And so I would love to know, what does that work look like? What are maybe some of the misperceptions that people might have about coaching? Why don't we start there?
Sure. I think a common misperception, and I think this is changing, but is that it's used for people who are underperforming. And it's actually the opposite. It's those folks who work with an executive coach, at least my clients and most people's clients, are actually high performing. And they want that thought partner to help them be even better. It's a gift, but it's not for a gap. Think about athletes, professional athletes, like they all have coaches, again, because they're talented, and it's helping them show up as their best and pointing out to them what they're doing really well and what they could tweak to have even a greater impact. And then the question around what does it look like? So a standard, kind of working with a client, we often will start with a 360 assessment. There's a few out there that I really like. One is emotional intelligence, because I think that those who are highly effective leaders are highly, emotionally intelligent and continuing to work on those skills. And so that helps build their awareness and understand their perceptions of how they see themselves showing up, how their peers see them showing up, how their, the board or their bosses, supervisors see them showing up, direct reports. And this is with the EQI, it's across 15 dimensions. So you really can understand, okay, whether it's decision making or independence or whatever the dynamic may be, where there are blind spots. And then some strategies. They often will pick a couple strategies, strategy. Sorry for the background noise.
That's Manhattan. I get you.
They'll pick a strategy for what they want to improve. So that's one piece of it. But it's more than just working with executives. It's a lot more than just their self-awareness and their leadership. It's also, like we've talked about, like, what are their obstacles? What are things that are getting in their way? What's the most important path forward? What will they do? Being an accountability partner to taking that baby step and moving forward on those specific actions. And a lot of leaders, including executives, they often will have one or two things that they're struggling with. It might be delegation, believe it or not, or control, right? And they're micromanaging. It may be people management and talent management skills. They're not coaching their direct reports. They're not comfortable having those difficult conversations. Those are just examples of things that where I have a lot of experience and help them kind of improve and show up as their best selves.
I think that resonates with me too, because I agree, and I've seen the same, which is that it's to help good or even great people get better. It's like fine tuning, because I think also by the time you've risen to be an executive, the challenges or the things that you're trying to tackle, like there's so much nuance to them. It's not like, hey, we need you to take better notes in the meeting or whatever. It's like, it's highly skilled. And so it makes it, again, I think it's very compelling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's just been so much going on in our world.
Right.
Like, even in this present moment, there's so much conflict and so how does a leader show up? And what, thinking through, how do they want to show up? What do they want to communicate? How do they want to support their organization? What does this mean for our business? What changes do we need to make? Pointing out, what assumptions are you making? Because more often than not, that's a blind spot that leaders don't necessarily recognize.
One related question is, as you're talking about some of this, how long do you think someone should work with a coach? And should it be the same coach, or, would you, is it kind of like it's a mechanic for an executive, where maybe there are different types of coaches you'd work with at different periods of time?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I think it's very personal. To me, it's a it depends type of answer. There are some clients that they in 4 to 6 months they're well on their way, and there are others that I've been working with for years, and it becomes because their goals, their vision continuously change, and they love that thought partnership, that trust. It's lonely. And it's a great question around even changing things up. I think it's really important also to be reflective of, am I getting everything I need from this coaching relationship? what's missing or what would be better. I do think it's healthy, similar to how we choose professionals, and whether it's a doctor or a therapist, to reevaluate. Is this so?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. As you're kind of looking at executive coaching and again working with senior people, are there any trends in your field that are kind of coming up that have really caught your attention? Are there one or two that are particularly of interest, and why do you think they're important?
Well, for me, well-being has always been a real interest and passion, and I think it's just the pandemic kind of opened people's eyes, broadened the lens on that topic. So I think, that's always been an interest of mine. Going back to like college, I struggled with, do I want to study like health, and do I want to go into business and accounting? Business was one, but I've always followed that space. So that's an area that I think I'm really passionate about. Because for all of us, we need to invest time in self-care. We need to make that a priority, the cliche of you got to put on your oxygen mask before you put on others. If we're not taking care of ourselves, then we're not able to show up as our best selves. Our heads aren't clear. We're not able to make the right decisions. We're not able to think efficiently through challenges we're facing. So that's one area of real importance to me, and a passion to me, and that I'm committed to long term, and think it's, even for the whole coaching sector, it's a particularly important space. The other that, whether it's coaching or regardless of what our business is, that I think is a really interesting topic and trend that I'm following, is artificial intelligence, and what the impact is going to be on our businesses. And I know from a lot of executives I work with, it's an interesting topic we talk about with some of the group coaching work I do with groups of executives. What policies are we putting into place? But I think AI, even bringing it back to coaching, there's a place for it, probably more for those junior levels, earlier career stage. I think it can be really helpful, again, to have that partner, even if it's an artificial intelligence partner, to think through, ask some challenging questions, give you that space and time to be reflective, and then be intentional around decisions that you're making and actions you're taking.
Intentionality is a huge takeaway from that. I agree with that. Thank you for all of this. It's been so helpful, and I think our audience will find it really fascinating as well. Before we let you go, there are two questions I would love to ask. The first is, which book, or if there's more than one, that's great too, has made an impression on you or changed your thinking the most? And maybe tell us why.
So the one book this year that I read that I recommend for any business professional is the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. There's so many leaders that just feel so overwhelmed and stretched. They may be overworked. They may feel that they don't own their time. It's being hijacked. And they're not as productive as they could be. And essentialism really is around getting the right things done and being highly focused on what's truly essential. Being able to say no, not now. I'm a big believer, less is best, less is more. And so it's about a systematic, disciplined approach to really being discerning about what's absolutely essential, and then eliminating everything else that's not, so that your time, your energy is focused on those highest priorities and contributions to areas that truly matter. You can really move the needle. So I loved that book. I think it's, for me, one that I'm going to come back to time and time again to listen to. And, for context, it was recommended to me by a client. So, there's so much power, knowledge shared in the coaching, which I then, pass along to others.
I love that. This is why I ask for book recommendations. I'm always curious to hear. So
Is there one that you've loved recently that you feel?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I finally read The Innovator's Dilemma recently, like over the summer, and I thought that was fantastic. And also, I wish I had read it before because I think there is, I think it's mischaracterized, at least in the summaries that I have read. Because I actually think there's a lot in there about understanding what really drives the decisions that your organization is making and transformation. And I thought the core insight that he's sharing is customers control the resources, not, it's not the CEO, it's not the leaders. And so that is, it's not that, the large established company like didn't see the trend coming. They often did. And, the Kodak example or whatever, but they're beholden in ways to the market that they have already created and are dominating, and the customers served there. And it's a competition for resources that prevents them from moving forward. So anyway, I just thought that was like an incredible, I've been thinking about it, for several months now intensely since I read that. So yeah,
I love that because it's like around these paradoxes
yes,
that get in our way. There's another book I read this year which talks a lot about that in terms of leaders and a lot of the paradoxes of leadership and how, we need to think through that and be agile and be aware. So yeah, interesting. I'm going to check that out.
it's very much aligned with this good revenue model because again, it's the short and long term, right? You can't pick just one. And especially when you're missing numbers or whatever, it's easier to think that it's the short term that's going to save you, and you need both. So, well, then our last question, and then we'll let you go. You've been so generous. What's one piece of advice that you'd offer? I mean, you've given a lot of fantastic advice here and some really great learnings, but is there any one particular piece of advice?
There's so much, but I will say, like, one thing that really struck me, I had the privilege of being in a small audience last spring with Coach K, who's the well-known coach for Duke and the American Olympic team, which won.
I don't know if you know, but I'm a Blue Devil, so
Oh,
so you're preaching to the choir over here.
you know, Coach K. So one thing he said that I just loved, and actually this came from his mother, was you are the driver of your own bus, and make sure that you only put good people on your bus. They'll take you places that you will never get to on your own. And I loved that for so many reasons, but mainly like it comes back to we drive our careers. We make those decisions. We are the drivers of those buses, and we pick and choose who's on our team, who we're aligning with, who mentors us, who our personal board of advisors are. But, make those choices, be really intentional about it. And yes, you align and get the best people and the right people and good people on your bus. It's exponential where you go.
I fully agree. I think it's about agency and intentionality. I think you're spot on. Well, this has been so wonderful, Carrie. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time and sharing so much wisdom with us. I'm so appreciative.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation and the treat. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us here at Good Revenue. If you liked what you heard, please consider leaving us a review, subscribing to the show, or sharing this episode with a friend. It really helps other listeners find us, and we're so grateful for your support.